Welcome back to another video on Gearsaw Studios, and today I'm going to be showing you how to build yourself a starter swamp house. It's a little detailed for a starter house, but it's certain to make sure the swamp is actually interesting to live in. So, let's begin. Go to the swamp and build. We just start off with some pillars. You can see you could gradient them, but personally I think stripped spruce with normal mangrove in the parts that are submerged is good. Make sure to stagger the parts that are actually mangrove though, so it's not all uniform, because certain parts would rot faster than others. Now, put them roughly every 3 blocks, roughly where you want the house to be. You can see, very simple, one segment plus a porch. You could easily expand the size of this house. Then, once you're done with that, go around and place a rim of mud, and then do the same thing with some slabs. So, once you do this, you can see how this really brings the build together. And remember, you can connect multiple segments and use the latter part of the tutorial twice over to make a very large starter house. Then, for any outdoor portions, I recommend building yourself a mangrove porch and adding cracks using stairs like this. Any arrangement is fine, remember this is a customizable tutorial. So we have all this going through, and then we connect the pillars. Pretty simple. From here, connect the bottoms of the pillars with stairs and slabs. You can see from here, it's not the most dramatic angle, and that's what we want. Then, for the actual flooring of the house, I'd recommend something like jungle. It has more of an earthy tone that matches the mud better than oak. So, let's do precisely that. And we have all this, and you can do this for as many floors as you want. You can make some parts taller than others, but of course, this tutorial covers the starter version. And if you want tips on how to do a bigger version, then you can always ask away in the comments. Anyways, beams running across and trapdoors along the bottom. A little pricey, but if you use a corkscrew method on some 2x2 spruce trees, then you'll get all the wood very quickly. Then detail these pillars with some dark oak buttons. You can see how these knots in the wood work very well. Blackstone also might work, but that's down to personal preference. I thought it was a little too obvious that was stone. Then detail the bottoms of these mud parts where they meet the pillars with a little extra slab. That way it just looks a little bit more Roman, if you get what I mean. Now let's just add a few more buttons, and what do you know, we have some nice pillars. So let's keep going. Up here we have the walls, using light gray terracotta as a placeholder. I also have the beams going up, you can see, for the walls, but I scrapped that later, so don't worry. Only add pillars on the corners. You can see it bows outward, and because it bows outward, it just looks really nice. Then, for the corners, we can add a little extra mud. That way, it looks more reinforced because, well, this thing needs to be sturdy in order to not fall over during some of the monsoons of the swamp. So, detail this little area here, and now we can add some walls up here. This is, of course, down to personal preference, but I think it adds a lot to the build by just making it a little bit more reinforced. Now, we can also add planter boxes. I use mangrove for this, but of course, any leaf block works except cherry. Cherry's a little bit too bright. Perhaps you could even use poplar in the future. So now, we have some signs going across, and you can see certified planter boxes. Now, for a little more advanced of a technique, you can see here, I have made the whole build bow out 1 block more. This gives it a more extreme angle, and while you will have to edit the underside to make sure it works again, it's pretty easy to eyeball that. I don't think I need to go over that. Still, this adds a lot to your build by giving a little bit more personality, even if it's a bit more difficult. Luckily, the roof usually does not change in response to this, so you should be able to do this just fine even if you aren't confident in your abilities. Now, we can also see how I've textured the wall. It's a gradient from orange terracotta to terracotta up to jungle. Ignore the light gray, that was a placeholder. Then, the bottom block of the walls, you can see simple spruce planks. So, we have all this, and we're going to add the entrance on the porch, of course. Now, we're going to keep going, add in all the walls around, and make sure the build is symmetrical. Of course, you can add asymmetry if you want, and the side of the build could have another larger house attached. Remember, this is customizable because I want you to make your own changes. Also, an interesting kind of window there using some stairs and walls. I actually keep this in the final version. But of course, it's up to you whether you want it. But I recommend noting that as a valid building technique in the future. Now, I also divide this part of the build using some of those pillars again. Of course, not using any spruce, using walls on the exterior only. Then, we have an option. I had an emergency back door, but for the front door, remember keep these the same. You can either do spruce, you could do mangrove, matches the porch a little too well. You could do jungle, matches the floor but actually works, and acacia. I stick with jungle for this because I just think it works the best. Since the pillars from the bottom do not go up into the walls, it means that our windows can be wherever they want. So place them where you think they'd go best. You can also decorate them with some extra shelves and trapdoors and stairs. You can see it on the sides. It looks absolutely fabulous. So you can see I do a similar version using jungle there. And of course, granite is a good block to think about whenever doing this build. Now we go to the top, and here's a little reversion. The mud going across here should be spruce planks instead. Simply, the whole framing of the build is spruce, and the mud looks a little bit too foundational for what we want. So let's go up here, and we're going to make it surround all parts of the build. You can see how we have a nice pointed roof. It's a little bit too Tudor-like, but I can assure you it works pretty well. If you want to go for an alternate version, what you could do is use full blocks such as mud because it's dark, and do a stairless roof. Then have the spruce go across in bands, making it look like it's holding the roof on from any high winds. I can assure you this actually works, but of course I move through with the Tudor style roof. Now, as we continue on with this build, you can see how we're really getting the shape down. So we now have to think about the roof, because the roof can dramatically change how we view the build. I go through with mangrove on this, but I could also see some bamboo working just as well. For now, here's a placeholder of jungle, and you can see how we have the roof going across. Now, here's the Gearsaw technique. Find the center of the build, preferably using your pillars, and then go a few blocks on either side. Exact numbers not required. You can see how our roof is now going to bow down in the middle. Then, on the edges, we add little roof endings. Of course, I decorate them a little bit later. I recommend innovating on those. And then the roof will go up to meet those. This adds a lot to your build, so of course, be sure to do that. Now, you can see the mangrove version is done, and the roof now has a personality of its own. You can also see how it bows outward by one extra block in the middle, just to give that extra look to it. You can refine this all you want, but for now, I'm going to recommend gradienting it. Mangrove does not have any good gradients, and I do try cinnabar here, but you can see that just doesn't really work. Instead, you could do the full block method and abandon having stairs on the roof altogether, barring the spruce, or you could do something like this, where I add the stripped version into it. Netherrack works very well for this, although it adds a lot of contrast, and then some damages using some stairs. Notice the shadows on the build. This adds a little bit of decay onto the build, and as any good storyteller knows, the best way to make your builds feel real, or any story feel real, is to add decay to it, like ruins, mushrooms, things like that. Things that signify age. So we have this, and we're going to add some dormers onto it. They're a little bit too high up to be of any actual use, but they look very good from the exterior. You can see, very simple stuff using some upside down stairs. So now, looking around, we can also add in some leaves and vines to the build to give that further decay. So you can see that one grew instantly. We're just going to place these around. Beware of their spreading, because remember they can spread horizontally and down, and they will do down forever. Then for the roof, you can see all this oak is growing across it in strands, making sure it looks natural, not too many go in the same direction, they're kind of randomized. These can even cover some of the windows. So now we have that, not too much to talk about with that. We can add some fence gates to the build. By adding fence gates, you can see it's just a little extra flair. We want to make sure that whatever we do to the roof, we do to both sides. So we have that there, and now we can add a window under it. You might notice that in this build that the windows never actually filled in. This is an intentional design choice. This place is kind of meant to be a little dingy. It doesn't have luxuries like glass, instead it has shutters like fence gates, or simply nothing at all. Fences also make good windows, so keep this in mind. If you already put in glass, you could probably get rid of it. Now to add that little extra decay, I put in some mushroom shelves. You can see full blocks, they will need silk touch, and then I put in some glowberry vines on the bottom of the build. Then you can shear them to make sure they don't grow indefinitely. Don't let them grow berries, by the way, a little bit too fantasy for what we want. So you can see here how we do it. We just shear them and they will never grow again. And hooray. So you see, we have a little extra decay. Eventually, I do go through and add some spore blossoms and hanging roots for the final touch. You know, the spore blossoms make particles, and that also sells the humidity of this place. You can also hide firefly bushes, which I do later, and you can also plant mushrooms on the build. Remember, they cannot be exposed to sunlight unless they're on mycelium. It'd be a tough block to include, but depending on what choices you made with the palette, I can definitely see someone making mycelium work. Notice how I do not actually use any moss in the build. This is also an intentional design choice because I want the green overgrownness of the normal swamp. Hence why I did not put this in the mangrove swamp. Very different vibes you have. But if you're in the mangrove swamp, you can definitely get away with something a little bit brighter. Now, for the inside, we want to have the first floor. You can see the terracotta wraps around the ceiling a little. It makes a little bit of a funnel. And then we have 2 floors going across with the dormers. And the idea here is that these are semi-floors, if you get what I mean. Essentially, they're not fully incorporated into the build. Instead, they're hanging platforms. This is what we want. It sells the dinginess of it. Remember, this is not a luxurious space. So now we have that, and we have some trapdoors going across the ceiling and making sure the roof actually looks bolted on because we can't hide the fact that there's mangrove in here. Notice trapdoor to shelf to stair, and you can see the shelves look like big nails, if you get what I mean. So all this and adding that almost ribbing to the build, it works very well. Additionally, if you go in survival, weird light map on the bottom right, you can see if you run and sprint at the same time while jumping, you can get across this forced crouch area. This walkway here, using the trapdoors, I'll add slabs on either side, works very well for connecting your build. Now, the interior. You might want to pause and write down everything you see that you like. But notably, we have a painting area where a daylight sensor acts as our palettes. We have a loom nearby with a chest for our banner patterns and dyes. And notice how we also have leaves growing on the ceiling. They are jungle leaves. The paint has been spilled on the floor, and we also have a bookshelf. It's a reference to Shrek. No, I'm not going to sing All Star. Maybe if this gets 1,000 likes. But anyways, the other half of the build is meant to give this survivalist feel. Notice the armor, they've been put there using pistons in order to put the glass on top of them. We also have hanging roots, we have storage, we have that little shelf there with the tripwires acting as hinges, and then basic survival goods. Remember, you can rewind and ask about anything you see here. I'll be sure to reply in a timely manner. So we have a very basic bedroom here, not much to say. And then you can see for the enchanting part, I used an anvil as part of the railing. Added the slabs I talked about earlier there, and what do you know? We have a survivalist house. Notice how I was able to tell a story with that painting and the poppy in the windowsill. But although this house looks complete, there's not really much to do because we already have the spore blossoms, we have the vines growing down, and there's no landscaping to be had because we're in the water. Well, it turns out that last statement is completely false because there is a lot of landscaping to be had. Here is a fantastic choice of what you can do. So go into the water, get some mangrove wood, not logs. Make sure they're all facing upright. You can replace them with commands. Be sure to practice your replace command so you don't accidentally destroy part of a completed mangrove. You can see they rocket from the water, and then you can also make them embed directly into the seabed. But anyways, we have ourselves some roots, and they're going to all connect into this main branch here. Then they are going to fan right back out. You can shave down these branches. These are just flared up for dramatic effect. So you can see here, we have ourselves a tree. Now, what we want to do is go in, make sure we don't have any of them facing sideways. I use World Edit to fix that for me. And then we want to give it essentially a bowl cut. You can see here, we have some propagules, some mushrooms, and some buttons on it. The edges of the mangrove leaves, you can see, are hanging down in big leaves, and the whole thing's just kind of tall. It blocks the window, but this might actually be a good thing. Makes it feel a little bit more claustrophobic, and that's kind of the vibe we want. We don't want the whimsical frog-filled swamp. We want the one that kind of stinks. You might find a bog body, things like that. Now, as we add more of the mangroves, notice the angle I'm viewing my build from. I like this angle, so don't put mangroves in front of it. So you can see there, where my cursor was, don't put a mangrove there. Make sure that your main line of sight is unobstructed, and make sure the bottom sides of your canopies are not flat like this. Instead, here's how I do the big leaves. You can see they're just kind of like spikes. Your trees are somewhat spiked. And make sure that the tops don't look too much like stairs. Otherwise, people will see the pattern and they won't like it. So you can see, very pretty mangroves we have here, custom built. A little big to build, they can take a while, but still, they add a ton. Added some weathered copper lanterns. You can make them waxed or unwaxed. And you can see here in the back, we have another mangrove. So we have these, and if you add a bunch of them, well, you can add their broken roots. You can make a dead one that's split in half. And what do you know, we're really telling a story here. We even have the boat tied up with a lead. Now, anywhere your build you'd consider part of the build, replace the bottom of the swamp with some mud. You can see here, it gives us more of a designated territory. If you're in survival mode, then you can give yourself a single bottle and repeat this process repeatedly. And you can see, although it's a little arduous, maybe get yourself a potion water breathing for this, still it makes it much more interesting to look at the bottom and much faster. We can also see we add a border of soul soil to this, so that way when we go to an aerial view, it becomes obvious what's our area. So we have that, and we're going to add some lily pads to act as pathways. And we can continue adding. You can see that broken in half mangrove in the top left. That's all very nice. And you can see the aerial view very clearly designated what is our territory. So let's make sure that our territory, make sure that it looks completely finished. Anything outside of it, we don't have to worry. Then we do some lily pads to make some parkour. As you can see, when I'm trying to record, I am not particularly good. But still, if you do this enough, then you'll become quite proficient. If you don't look up between every jump though, you'll probably have a much easier time than me. Then, anytime that you accidentally reach land, you can continue the gradient onto land. Make the shores muddy. In fact, I actually recommend that you make your own little islands out here. Don't bother with the soul soil if it's too small. So we're going to add a small tree here and some firefly bushes. Now for the great reveal, we have the completed build. Now with cattails, firefly bushes, the spores, we have everything here. And that means we are done. Looking at our cattails, you can see they're just some green stained glass panes with some brown candles. And that's all fine and dandy. Add those around, don't add them under the build, otherwise how'd they get light? Make little clusters around land or random parts of your territory. You can see the little tree there, it was made of spruce with acacia leaves, gives it a different species. So we have all this. Here's how I did the firefly bushes. Remember, they just need to be dark. They don't have to actually be exposed to the area you want them to be particling. And now we have ourselves a completed area. And that means it's the end of today's video. If you enjoyed this video, remember, please like and subscribe. And if you had any trouble with any part of this tutorial, tell me in the comments below. I can use it to improve future videos, and I can help you with anything you're doing, even if you're very loosely following this tutorial. After all, I don't intend for you to follow it block by block, hence why I don't give those instructions. Either way, enjoy the rest of your day with your new fancy house personalized by you. Gearsaw out.